A cheetah's ear rotates before the rest of its body moves. Its pupils adjust. Its gaze locks onto something you cannot see yet. The animal is already reading the situation, and no one has walked through the door. A cheetah hears your voice before it sees you. The sound reaches the fence first, before a face, a scent, or a hand appears. Is it someone the animal has learned to expect, or a stranger it has no record of? The evidence is narrower and more interesting. Can a cheetah treat one human voice as different from another? Most people assume animals sort familiar from unfamiliar by face or smell. Voice is the sense that gets overlooked. For cheetahs raised alongside the same handlers day after day, voice may arrive first and carry the most weight. Researchers played a recording through a hidden speaker with no person present, no scent, no visual cue at all. The same sentence, spoken by two different people. If the cheetah's response changed, the difference had to live in the voice. 11 adult male cheetahs, all captive-born, all hand-raised from early life, all living alongside the same handlers for at least 2 years before any testing began. These were not animals with occasional human contact, feeding, enclosure transfers, enrichment sessions, public encounters. The same people, the same voices, repeated across hundreds of days. By the time researchers ran their test, these cheetahs had built a detailed record of who mattered. The test design removed every cue except sound. A loudspeaker mounted at the enclosure door, exactly where a real handler would normally appear. Trials ran before the park opened, in early morning light, with no other humans visible anywhere in the area. For 6 weeks before any voice played, the equipment sat in place so the animals could habituate to its presence. Then came the recordings. One sentence, used in real husbandry routines. "I'll need a backhandler here." Spoken once by a familiar handler. Spoken once by an unfamiliar visitor. The two recordings did not differ meaningfully in length or fundamental frequency, so the researchers had controlled for simple pitch and duration differences. Between real trials, the team ran mock setups with no playback at all, so the animals could not learn that equipment placement predicted a voice. Each recording played only once per animal. The order of familiar and unfamiliar trials rotated across subjects. 2 observers scored every behavioral response and reached 99% agreement on what they saw. Because the words were held constant across both conditions, whatever difference the cheetahs showed had to come from the voice itself, not the message. All 11 cheetahs looked toward the loudspeaker after the familiar handler's voice played. Only 5 of 11 did so after the unfamiliar visitor's voice. The speed gap was wide. Mean time to first gaze, 13.4 seconds for the familiar voice, 82.5 seconds for the unfamiliar voice. Total gaze duration, 25.4 seconds versus 5.1 seconds. Activity changes followed the same pattern. 8 of 11 cheetahs changed activity after the familiar voice. 2 of 11 did so after the unfamiliar voice. Activity shifted roughly 3 times faster when the familiar handler's voice played. In practice, that meant standing up, moving toward the speaker, or shifting posture, not dramatic displays. Behavioral shifts consistent with anticipating something consequential. The limit is narrow but important. The study tested one contrast, familiar versus unfamiliar, and that is all it can support. Which specific quality of the voice drove the response, whether familiarity, tone, or pitch pattern, remains unresolved by this experiment. The researchers' own interpretation pointed toward associative learning. These animals had linked a specific voice to feeding, transfer, or enrichment. They had learned who mattered, and the voice alone was enough to activate that record. The next clue comes from timing, when a cheetah first learns that certain humans matter. Researchers working with wild-born orphaned captive cheetahs found that the timing of early human contact shaped how adults sorted people later in life. Cheetahs who entered human care at the earliest developmental stage, hand-reared from den age, showed clear familiarity effects with known caregivers in person. More purring, more movement toward familiar humans than unfamiliar ones. Cheetahs who arrived later in development showed attention, but not the same pattern. That study tested physical presence, not voice alone, so it does not directly replicate the 2018 experiment. Still, both studies point toward the same conclusion. The window in which human caregiving begins may set the template for how an adult cheetah sorts people. And both studies involved captive animals with specific management histories. Neither tells us what a free-ranging cheetah, a minimally handled zoo animal, or a rehabilitation candidate would do. The evidence is specific to human-managed cheetahs with intensive early contact. How does that compare to other species? Domestic cats, when played three strangers' voices calling their names and then the owner's voice, showed a rebound response to the owner's voice after habituating to strangers. Ear movement, head orientation, postural shift, no dramatic running. In felids, recognition often looks like a subtle reorientation, not a theatrical display. Dogs show something the cheetah study does not. In a forced choice test, family dogs located their owner using voice alone, choosing correctly more often than chance, with performance tracking acoustic similarity in fundamental frequency and jitter. Horses carry the closest parallel to the cheetah interpretation. Animals trained with two individual human voices tied to positive versus negative interactions later showed different ear positions and lateralized responses when those same voices played back alone. Particular voices had been tagged with remembered consequences. Goats showed something different again, tracking whether a human was attending, reading body and head orientation to adjust their own approach. That is a distinct skill, reading whether you are paying attention rather than recognizing who you are. Keeping those categories separate matters. Across these species, the evidence describes a spectrum. Cats reorient, dogs choose, horses tag voices with history. Cheetahs raised alongside specific handlers treat a familiar voice as a signal that something consequential is approaching. At the enclosure door, dawn light is still low. No one is visible yet. The cheetah's ear rotates toward a sound arriving through the fence. A familiar handler's voice pulls its gaze in under 14 seconds. A stranger's voice may not move it at all. So yes, human-managed cheetahs raised in close daily contact with handlers respond differently to a familiar voice than to a stranger's voice, saying the exact same words. That is voice-based discrimination, and it is real. It is also specific. These were captive-born, hand-raised animals in an intensive management setting. The evidence does not extend to wild cheetahs, minimally handled animals, or animals without that early developmental history. The clearest point is the timing. The cheetah did not wait to see who walked in. It already responded. The voice arrived first, and for these animals, in that moment, that was enough to change what it did next.